Hi, everyone. My name's Brad Pleima with EcoEngineers, and I'm excited to talk to you virtually from the cornfields of Iowa about emerging RNG markets. I'm a senior engineer at EcoEngineers. I also lead our renewable natural gas line of business. Just a little bit about EcoEngineers as a company. We're renewable energy consultants, and we do three primary things: consulting, compliance management, and auditing, and all around lower carbon, renewable energy, renewable fuels projects. We're divided into 6 service areas that we feel represent successful clean energy projects: training and education, regulatory engagement, measurement, life cycle analysis, carbon modeling, uh, supporting the development of the asset through our consulting team, and then we help manage compliance for all of the credits and areas and markets that we're going to talk about today. And then we're also auditors under several of these key programs, including a lot of the voluntary market audits. We're going to focus mostly on renewable natural gas today, talk a little bit about renewable electricity, and touch on renewable hydrogen, as those are both options to use biogas and renewable natural gas in various markets. But we work across a lot of other fuel types, across a lot of different technologies as well, and span regulations across the world. We're going to look at what's the overall market summary. What are the where can this RNG, or where can biogas that's being generated, where can that be sold? Most people are probably familiar with use in the transportation markets, RINs under the Renewable Fuel Standard, credits under the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard. There's a similar program in Oregon and British Columbia in Canada. Really, all those assume the use, in order to participate, they assume the use of this renewable fuel as transportation fuel. We're going to touch on each one of those and a status. We've also seen tremendous growth in voluntary markets. And what do we mean by voluntary? Really, any non-regulated, somebody that's using this for corporate goals, overall sustainability goals, ESG goals, buying RNG, not because they're mandated to, but because they want to lower their overall greenhouse gas emissions and overall carbon footprint, and may have some carbon neutrality goals. And then spend a little bit of time talking about what are emerging RNG markets. And this is the exciting area if you're in the RNG biogas space. Is there are a lot of potential expansion markets for RNG. Canada is currently looking at a national LCFS type program called the Clean Fuel Standards, or standard, that's looking to be implemented in late 2022. We're seeing other renewable fuel production facilities or petroleum-based fuel facilities purchasing RNG to lower their overall carbon footprint. And we'll talk a little bit about that electricity, using biogas to generate renewable electricity and participate in some of these markets. The common theme we'll hear today is carbon intensity, and I think that's really the overall life cycle of a fuel or of a product. What feedstocks are being used? How did you make the fuel? What did you do with that or energy? And then what happens to the co-products? But I think in the market, especially over the last few years, there's been a renewed focus on carbon intensity. Many of these programs or markets, like the Renewable Fuel Standard and RINs, some of the voluntary markets, they really don't, carbon intensity is not a component of that. It's volume-based program. And if you produce, 1 MMBTU or 1 decatherm of renewable energy, you get the same amount, the same credit. Comparatively, if carbon intensity does matter, like in the California LCFS program, Oregon Clean Fuel Program, and many of the emerging markets, that carbon intensity score is important. The lower your carbon intensity score, the more greenhouse gas emissions that you're reducing, and in many of the programs, the more value that's associated with the fuel that you're producing. So just to look at the overall federal renewable fuel standard and RINs, key things to point out: 36 billion gallons of renewable fuel blended into the transportation market by 2022 was the original goal of the RFS. We're not going to make that. In 2021, we'll probably be somewhere around the 21 billion range. So we've got a big gap, 15 billion gallons, before we can meet that target. It's also important to note that the program doesn't go away after 2022. Congress originally outlined a schedule to 2022 when they passed the RFS, and there is some uncertainty around how the program will be administered beyond 2022. But RINs will exist, and there's a lot of questions, especially with the new Biden administration. Will the administration provide additional clarity to the schedule? Will they want to make any modifications, improvements, or changes to the program? All of those things are items that we'll be watching. Speaking of the Biden administration, a lot of people ask us, what do you see the impact of this administration on climate? And there's no doubt there will be a renewed focus on climate and Biden's commitment to that. We've seen a carbon neutral goal by 2050 be put out there. Also looking at potentially upwards of $2 trillion in clean energy investments. And we've already seen some immediate short-term RIN price increases because of a Biden administration change, along with several other factors. But I think that's really given a lot of entities this short-term positive outlook for RIN prices. There's also a lot of optimism that under the RFS, there is a pathway that allows for charging of electric vehicles through renewable electricity. And although that pathway has not been activated by the EPA, and no projects are taking part in that right now, there is some hope and optimism that a Biden administration will change that and allow for that going forward. And as we mentioned before, there is need for more clarity beyond 2022. So what will happen? Pricing is very difficult to predict beyond that point because we don't exactly know. Will the program operate in its current form? Will there be any major changes or improvements to the RFS? And there is even some talk about what would a national LCFS type program look like. So these are the items that we're going to be keeping our eye on here as we see in 2021 as a Biden administration goes through its first year in office. Switching over to the California low carbon fuel standard, it's a similar program in that it targets transportation related fuels, has a goal of 20% greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2030. And unlike the RFS, there's a detailed schedule 10 years out into the future, exactly what the goals of the program will look like and what those target decreases for GHG emissions reductions are. Differently, this program it's performance-based, so that carbon intensity score really matters in the LCFS program. It's fuel neutral in its credit setup, and it's really been used as a reference for many, many other programs across the US and across the world. The Oregon Clean Fuels program is set up very, very similarly to the California program. And there really is a push in this program to make more and more carbon intensity improvements in renewable fuels. So just a quick example of how this works. I think this graph shows it best, where the program sets compliance curves, one for diesel and one for gasoline. You can see on the orange and blue lines here. And what happens is if you import a fuel that has a higher carbon intensity score than those compliance targets, then you generate deficits under the program. And if you import a fuel with a better carbon intensity score than that number, you generate credits. And people that generate deficits have to go out and buy credits to satisfy this overall obligation. The program also gets more and more restrictive. So for every same unit of fuel, year over year, you'll generate more deficits and fewer credits. So there's this continuous need to make improvements and to better carbon intensity scores. The LCFS has gotten a lot of attention in RNG, and rightfully so. It's been a big driver specifically in low CI dairy, swine manure, food waste anaerobic digesters. And I think this graph shows why. Is credit pricing has been rising for the last 7 years. And right now, the credit market is somewhere around $190, $195. There is a $200 per metric ton price cap on an LCFS credit that is adjusted for inflation. But you can see over the last 2+ years, credits have really been trending in that $180 to above $200 range consistently. Big market. It is a very competitive market, and that is a market that many renewable fuels target, because you do get a stack the LCFS credit on the RIN. We expect that market to continue to be even more competitive, especially in RNG, as more and more projects come online. So another area, I touched on this earlier, is this voluntary market, and it's really had a significant growth in deals being done for RNG. So what we've seen is utilities, they may use those as a green tariff. They may buy RNG to offer their customers, both at the residential, commercial, and industrial level, an alternative to fossil-based natural gas. They may be buying for upcoming regulations. They may have corporate sustainability or greenhouse gas reduction goals. Also, universities, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies have also been big buyers or looking at purchasing RNG to reduce their overall carbon footprint. And the one thing here again to ask is CI important? Are those entities buying just a volume of RNG? They really only care about the number of MMBTUs? Or do they really care about that and the carbon intensity scoring? We're seeing a big trend and emerging push towards understanding and knowing the carbon intensity score of all RNG or biogas that is being sold out there in the market. And the benefit of doing that is you're able to quantify directly the amount of greenhouse gas emissions reduction in metric tons through that carbon intensity score and through that volume purchased. So we're going to continue to see more and more buyers develop in this market, and we feel a continued emphasis on carbon intensity scoring as opposed to just volumes of renewable fuel. Just to touch base on the diversification of carbon markets, this is really the exciting area that we see is new markets developing. So in the United States, states are looking at implementing an LCFS type program. How would that be framed up and how would that work? What are the goals that they would want to accomplish? But note that those do take time. So even if New Mexico were to start this year or New York, it will probably take a few years to develop and ratify and implement the program. And then we have to start to see the market conditions warrant a buildup of credit value. So certainly in that 3 to 5 year horizon, really optimistic that more and more state level programs will provide other markets for RNG. I touched on the Canadian LCFS program that is going through the rulemaking and drafting process right now. We expect that to be implemented sometime in late 2022. Other countries looking at similar type programs. And another one is local climate action plans. So we're based in Des Moines, Iowa. The city of Des Moines recently announced its plans to move towards GHG emissions reductions and ultimately hit some carbon neutrality goals. And RNG, renewable electricity, can be a part of achieving those goals. And again, which of these programs will require a carbon intensity based system? We think many of these outlined here will, and will have some performance based or CI based incentive program. So just to touch in the last few minutes here, what are some other emerging non-RNG but also related to biogas is renewable low CI electricity. The California LCFS program allows biogas to be used to charge electric vehicles and participate in their program. You do have to, the facility has to physically be located in this area in green. In the WEC region, you could generate biogas or generate electricity and put that electricity onto the grid. And if you can distribute and get that power into a California balancing authority, then you can use the book and claim process or have a virtual contract through displacement to charge electric vehicles and participate in the LCFS program through generating credits. Right now, there are no RINs for that, but again, there's a lot of excitement and anticipation that may happen under a Biden administration. Something else that's gained a lot of momentum and talk over the last 1 to 2 years is renewable hydrogen. Whether you're using that renewable hydrogen as a vehicle fuel or even as thermal heat. Also, the California LCFS program as vehicle fuel allows for LCFS credits to be generated through the use of renewable hydrogen. We think more state LCFS programs will also incentivize hydrogen as a vehicle fuel. But similar to electricity, there is no RIN right now. There's no pathway under the RFS to generate RINs from renewable hydrogen. Also, renewable hydrogen has thermal heat. So just generating that at the site and injecting that hydrogen directly into the utility, into the grid, is something that has also been talked about quite a bit lately. I think it's still early on in the stages. I'm not aware of any specific hydrogen tariff or requirements to inject hydrogen into utilities, but we do think that's coming. But the things to balance there are, if you're generating RNG instead of hydrogen, you can use a book and claim system and offtake that at other areas. So that's a characteristic that people are using to take advantage of the program. So all of that being said, what is the overall market summary? Our outlook on RNG and biogas is very, very positive. More markets are a good thing for RNG and project development. We think short term, what we can see right here on the horizon, very positive on pricing, both on RINs and LCFS. We do see the potential for LCFS credit prices to soften beyond that term because of all of these renewable fuel projects. And actually, EcoEngineers recently completed a fueling supply scenario where we projected out credits and deficits, and we do think there is the potential for an oversupply of credits into that market. We're tracking that number, 150 potential RNG projects across the country. That may be closer to 200 now. So development is full steam ahead. We do expect those regulated markets, RIN prices, LCFS credit prices, are going to continue to fluctuate just like they have over the last several years. And one way to mitigate that is through these long-term fixed price agreements with these voluntary markets. You may have to give up some of the potential value in the RIN and LCFS market, but you gain that in longer term certainty and security, assuming you're entering into an agreement with a creditworthy counterparty, that you don't have to weather the ups and downs of the RIN market or the LCFS market. You can focus on producing that renewable energy and selling that to a fixed price for 3, 5, 7, 10, maybe even 15 or 20 years. And the other thing we'll see, will RNG become more affordable? There's still a segment that people wondering, why would they pay 4, 5, or 6x the value of the commodity for these renewable attributes? I think a lot of people have overcome that because you do get to quantify those exact carbon emissions reductions, and they have GHG emission reduction goals to meet. But there's still a certain segment that if RNG maybe was more affordable, it would be more readily adopted by many, many others, households, other businesses, other industries. But all in all, we're very, very optimistic about the direction of RNG and all of these emerging and current markets. Feel free to reach out if you want to learn more about any of the items that we discussed today. So thanks for your time, and appreciate you listening to this.